Johnny Appleseed, retold by M.J. York, illustrated by Michael Garland. Long, long ago, a wee baby was born in Massachusetts and given the name John Chapman. In those days, most Americans lived on the East Coast, and they were only beginning to move west into Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Indiana. You might ask why we still remember humble John Chapman even today. He did not lead armies into battle or run the government. He did not found a city or invent something important. No, we remember John Chapman for something simpler, something smaller, and that something is part of his name. You've probably heard of him, too. His nickname was Johnny Appleseed. Now, some people say Johnny Appleseed loved apples right from the start, while he was still a baby in his cradle. They say he would fuss and cry something spectacular until his mother fed him applesauce or gave him cider or brought him apple blossoms. That baby boy would giggle for hours watching the branches of an apple tree sway in the breeze. When he grew a little older, an apple was his favorite ball for catching, and the branch of an apple tree was his favorite perch for daydreaming. So there's Johnny Appleseed as a little boy. He loved apples even when he was a baby. He loved the other trees of the forest too. His mother taught him the names of all the plants and animals. He loved the animals, and they loved him right back. Does with their fawns would come up to lick his hand. Crows would bring him shiny bits and bobs they found by the sides of roads, and bears would lead him to the ripest berry patches. When he had grown into a young man, Johnny's feet began to itch. You see, Johnny's itching feet were telling him it was time to leave home and see the world. But Johnny did not mean to merely wander. Oh no, Johnny Appleseed had a mission in mind when he was getting ready to leave home. He knew people were fast moving west. Where they were moving, though, there were no apple trees. Johnny couldn't imagine a life without apples. He didn't want the pioneers in their new homes to be missing out on apple cider and applesauce and apple pies and apple turnovers and apple cake and, well, you get the idea. So Johnny Appleseed loved the animals and plants, and he was friends with all of them. He decided to move west and plant apple trees because there weren't any apple trees out west. So Johnny went and he gathered a big bag of apple seeds from the mill where they pressed apple cider. They had no use for the seeds at the mill, so they were happy to let Johnny take them. Soon Johnny was ready to leave home. He had his bag of seeds and he took a cooking pot so he could make dinner wherever he went. He carried the bag in his hand, but he wore the pot on his head where it made a fine hat. So there's Johnny Appleseed with his hat and his seeds, and he's going to be on his way to go out west. Johnny walked and he walked, walking circles through New York, Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Indiana. He walked through rain and he walked through snow. Sometimes he walked on roads and his journey was easy. Sometimes he pushed through tangled forests so thick he must have been the first person to come through ever. Johnny walked so far he wore his shoes clear off. The soles of his feet grew tougher than the toughest boots. So Johnny Appleseed walked so far and so long that his shoes wore off. Johnny never wanted harm to come to any animal. This love of all life included even the lowliest of creatures. Why, one summer he noticed mosquitoes were flying into his campfire and burning up. He immediately put the fire out. He didn't want to be comfortable if it meant another creature dying. If he was stung by a hornet, he'd take it gently in his hands and release it. He was once bit by a rattlesnake and killed it by accident. He felt sorry about it for years afterward. So Johnny Appleseed was nice to all the creatures, even little tiny mosquitoes. He didn't want them to burn up in his fire. And even the mean old rattlesnake that he killed, he felt bad about it. One cold winter's night, Johnny went to curl up in an old hollow log. He planned to build a fire outside and curl up, snug as a bug. When he poked his nose in, however, he had a surprise. A mother bear and her 2 cubs had beaten him to the log. So there's Johnny Appleseed. He wanted to sleep inside this log, but he found a mother and 2 bears inside. What do you think Johnny's going to do? Remember, he loves animals. Quietly, so as not to disturb anybody, Johnny backed right out of the log and made his camp outside in the snow. So he didn't bother the bears, he just slept in the snow. That was so sweet. Johnny made friends everywhere he went. He made friends with farmers and pioneers. They often shared their support with him, or else Johnny cooked up a fine stew for everyone in his cooking pot hat. When Johnny's shirt or pants got ragged, one of his new friends would sew them up again. Some of his friends even gave him new clothes. And every time they said goodbye, Johnny left his friends with small sacks of apple seeds to plant on their own farms. Decades later, you could tell where Johnny Appleseed had been by the orchards that grew up behind him. So his friends used the apple seeds that he gave them to grow orchards. An orchard is a big area with all of the same kinds of trees. So they're talking about apple orchards. That means that his friends used the seeds to plant a bunch of apple trees that became orchards. The longer Johnny walked, the less respectable he looked. At times, he wore nothing more than a grain sack with a hole in the bottom for his head and a length of twine for his belt. But folks didn't mind. They knew old Johnny Appleseed was on a mission. He loved to stop and chat and tell his life story. Long after he'd walked on, Johnny's friends talked about how generous he was and about his kindness to animals. And he grew up in their memories as the apple trees grew taller and stronger and bore loads of fruit. So everybody talked about how sweet Johnny Appleseed was. He was kind to animals, he was kind to nature, and he was kind to his friends. Johnny Appleseed walked for years and years. Little girls he'd brought ribbons for became grandmothers, and little boys he'd carved wooden soldiers for became old men. Then one day, Johnny Appleseed planted his last tree. He lay down in one of the first orchards he planted, and he slept his last sleep. Even today, if you go to the right place in Ohio, throw your head back and take a big sniff. Did you catch a hint of apple blossoms in the air? That's the spirit of Johnny Appleseed passing by. The end.